You're listening to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, your home for holistic, evidence-based cognitive enhancement strategies. And now your host, Eric Levi.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, where we discuss using nootropics, biohacking, and nutrition to help you boost your cognition. My name's Eric. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner. And if you're new to the channel, please take a second and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, and hit that little bell icon so you can get notified every single time a new video drops or podcast drops. And if you're listening to this on the audio version on a podcast, then hit the subscribe button in your little podcast player. And if you really enjoy this podcast, which there's no doubt you're gonna, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave the podcast a nice review. 5 stars would be awesome. Today on the podcast, I have a gentleman by the name of Kelly Roman. Kelly is a co-founder of Fisher-Wallace Laboratories, a medical device company based in New York that was first to commercialize wearable brain stimulation. Prior to Fisher-Wallace, Kelly graduated from Harvard and served as a marketing executive in the media and software industries. Kelly, welcome to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is cool. You're the first Harvard grad I've had on the podcast. So I guess we're moving up in the world.
We're moving down. I don't know. One of the two.
Yeah. We got all these public school junkies, and now we got moving into the Ivy League. I like it. This is exciting because, I've been doing some research on Fisher-Wallace and what you guys do over there. And it's really exciting because I've been getting into this, this biohacking wearable, these biohacking gadgets. I actually have one here at my home, and you put it on your head and it stimulates your mind, and it has all of these brain boosting benefits. And I'm just so excited about the innovation in the space, and it's so cool that you're a part of that. And I want to jump into all that with you. But before I do, maybe you could tell a little bit or talk a little bit about how you even got into the space to begin with. What is your origin story?
Yeah, I have an unusual one for medical device executives. So I came out of media background. I was an English major at Harvard. I creative writing was my thing. I ended up writing a book for HarperCollins, a graphic novel, actually. So I was a comic book writer, and but a science fiction, kind of a sci-fi writer. So in terms of, I was always interested in technology and wearable tech, and kind of exploring that in that kind of medium. And then I also worked at Nielsen, the ratings company, it's data company, Nielsen Ratings, well heard of. And then at a software company that was backed by Union Square Ventures, which backed Twitter. It was called Oddcast. It was kind of avatar related software. And my brother actually was the one who had always been into medical research. So he is a number of years older than me, also went to Harvard, but was a biochemistry major, and is now a professor in medical school here in New York. And so growing up, I would always be reading journal articles that he would publish in Nature and other places. And we'd always talk about it. So I had kind of a comfort level with that. And I also worked at a time in Los Angeles for a executive recruitment firm, a headhunting firm. And that was right during the kind of .com boom. It was one of my first jobs out of college. And so I had a lot of experience interviewing people, building teams. And so I think pulling from all those things, I brought like a fresh set of eyes to the medical space, which has turned out to be a good thing. So I didn't really look at things the same way as if I'd kind of spent my whole career in it. And I met my co-founder, Chip Fisher, after his original partner, Wallace, and Fisher-Wallace died of cancer very early in, and I replaced Wallace. And they had, at that time, they'd acquired the technology from the inventors. And so there's these two talented electrical engineers named Paul and Bernard List who had developed this device and had gotten it through the FDA. They had also passed away. So, really I look at it as there kind of being 5 co-founders. And Chip and I are the ones that, that are still alive and are working very hard to kind of, I think, get the vision that these other 3 guys had fully realized. And so, we had this hospital looking wearable device in 2009 when I started with Chip. And this is a time when drugs were basically out of patent now for mental health. So, in the 90s and the early 2000s, everyone was seeing commercials for antidepressants and Ambien and so forth. And by the mid to late 2000s, you'd stop seeing those. They had gone generic. And also at that point, doctors and patients were very familiar with all the side effects, all the downsides of drugs. They tend to work for a while, then the effects wore off and so forth. So, and then Fitbit had been founded a couple of years before. So I think there was this kind of confluence of being the right time to enter the mental health market. Wearables were just becoming something of a thing. And so people could think of our device more like a wearable and less like electroshock therapy. And then we started investing in research. But basically, we're an electrical brain stimulation device. It's comfortable to wear. We're 20 minutes morning and evening. And we just did 3 studies during the pandemic. We have 70,000 patients, 14,000 prescribers. We're regulated by the FDA. And so I think, I'm a big support. I take supplements. I exercise. I do a lot of things for my health and wellness as well. But one thing I really enjoy focusing on with Fisher-Wallace is trying to bring some of that really heavy duty FDA regulation and clinical trial research into the space. We're not the only company doing that, but I think kind of bringing that level of, we're a prescription device. You have to have a prescription to get it. And so we kind of have that extra, I think, gravity that comes with that, and trying to elevate the space a bit with that science.
Yeah, that's such an interesting breakdown of, how did these wearable devices rise in popularity like they have in the last, 10, 15 years? I mean, because I don't know if it's because I'm kind of newer in the space and all of a sudden I'm seeing like my reticular activation is going and I'm just seeing like wearable device, biohacking gadget. Cause I don't think it's always been like this, but it makes sense when you give that timeline of, the drugs were out of patent and now the market opens up for all of these new gadgets and Fitbit, you're right. I don't know if it was the first, but it was the first that I think most people heard of at the very least.
Right.
And it comes out and it's like, everyone's got a Fitbit. It was just a thing like anybody could have one. Your mom could have one. You could have one. Like you didn't have to be a scientist. It's just you put it on your wrist, you get your steps in, you're checking your heart rate and that really catches on because it just takes people's ability to own their own health to another level.
Yeah. And I think that's also happening now with mental health, right? I think coming out of the pandemic, the rates of anxiety and depression up 300%. You have professional athletes and musicians and others who are being very public about it in social media. And so our FDA indication is to treat anxiety, depression, and insomnia. And those are the 3 trials we did during the pandemic. And I think that kind of cultural inflection point, if you will, around mental health seems to be happening right now. And so this is kind of, this is the place we've always kind of wanted to be. And I think part of that is also being combined with telehealth, right? I mean, during the pandemic, there's a lot more telemedicine use because you couldn't go see your doctor. And that's really the perfect medium for us because that means that you can get your prescription in a remote fashion without having to go to the office. And then we FedEx the device to you when we have the script. And we're actually, and by the time your listeners hear this podcast, we're going to have the prescription process fully integrated with our checkout process, just like it is with Hims and Hers and Row and some of these other kind of mass, consumer sites for drugs where they're selling everything from Viagra to Propecia. We're focusing on our hardware. And so I feel like we've now entered this new phase. Kind of the first one was this kind of transition and people looking for non-drug alternatives and the competition being kind of opening up, allowing for more competition after the big patent blockbuster drugs had kind of gone away from people's attention. But now we're seeing, mental health, the stigma come down, the ease of access increase. And so it's a very exciting time to be innovating in this space.
And that's why these gadgets are so important because it's no secret now that like as open as we're becoming about mental health conversations, people are coming out and saying, hey, depression's real. I've got it. I've got anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, insomnia. I mean, I would imagine most people at this point have some form of insomnia, because if you're looking at a screen for a majority of the day, it's just kind of comes with the territory.
Yep.
But we also know, we're also not afraid to acknowledge the serious side effects that come with these medications, and just how much it varies from person to person. And some people have been dealing with these side effects for a long time, and some people acknowledge the mental health issues they have, and they just don't want to mess with the medications, which is why like my space is so interesting, because it's like the nootropics, the supplements, I really try to break it down into whole body health. But at the same time, it's like, I want to know, is there a way to actually get right to the brain and actually affect it without having to put something in your body that can just mess with your entire biochemistry?
That's right. And that's for something like an SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, like a Prozac or Lexapro. I think that's the inefficient delivery system of a pill, right? It's certainly convenient. You pop a pill, you drink a little water, but it goes into your gastro tract to get to your brain. You have a lot of serotonin receptors in your gastro tract. So, when I took Lexapro, I had kind of, no matter how much I ate, I was hungry. That was the side effect for me. I was always hungry. And of course you gain weight, and if that's the case. And so, I actually, when I first met my business partner, he introduced me to this device, and ever since then, that was 13 years ago. It's the only thing I've needed to use to keep my mood, healthy and normal. And I was really happy to not have to use the medication. So that was my personal, and when that happened to me in the first few weeks, I was like, I want to work on this business with you. Obviously, the next step is you have to have more than your own personal experience. You have to have clinical trial data that shows that not only the device works, but it works against the placebo. And that's a very difficult thing to do, because in mental health, placebo effect is very powerful. It's powerful whether it's a drug or a device. Cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy, the research that's performed with that, there's not a placebo arm, because how do you really create a placebo of a talk therapy? So really they tend to compare against what's called a wait list, which is simply not someone not getting any therapy, or they'll compare it to a drug result. But in our studies that we just did, we actually had to compare people using the real thing, the active device, with a device that looked like it was functioning, but was not actually delivering the stimulation, but still had the behavior change of the active device, which means, you're sitting with it for 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, and, you're interacting with a doctor during the trial. So these trials are challenging, and, we're submitting the first one that we did to a major journal, hopefully be published by the end of the year. That's when we can really be very detailed about the results. But I can say we're excited. We wouldn't be submitting it to a big journal if it wasn't positive. And we're excited to share that. It's the first time that a large scale trial has been done with our device. And certainly during the pandemic, it's kind of an artifact in that sense, to have been able to do a study at a time when all the hospitals were overwhelmed. And so this had to be an at-home study, but still have all the rigor of a regular trial with the placebo arm and all the other controls. So,
and are these clinical studies in people that were depressed, had anxiety? What was the was the population?
We had 3 studies. Yeah, one was for generalized anxiety disorder. So you had to have you have to be screened and diagnosed for that, and you couldn't have things like clinical depression, bipolar, substance use disorder, suicidality, schizophrenia, attention disorders. And it was pretty rigorous exclusion criteria, as they call them. So, and then we also did a study on major depressive disorder, and same thing. It had to be kind of a very pure diagnosis. You couldn't have co-occurring clinical anxiety. You could have a little bit of sleep difficulty. That was about it, because sleep difficulties are symptoms of both of those things. But other than that, I mean, for instance, about a quarter of the patients that applied to the trial had some thoughts of suicide in the last year, and so they had to be excluded. And a lot of our patients who are actually getting our device have had some form of suicidality at some point, but that's not, we couldn't have that in the major depressive disorder study. So, and then we did an insomnia study on what's called sleep maintenance insomnia, which is, people who have trouble staying asleep as opposed to people who are having trouble getting to sleep. And so in that case, you're looking at, what's the total sleep time? How are you improving total sleep time? And for that, we actually used a Fitbit Charge 4 to track total sleep time. And the Fitbit Charge 4 is actually a good device for tracking that. It's not as accurate to track what's called sleep onset, which is how long it takes to get to sleep. But it's quite accurate. In fact, is better than actigraphy in measuring total sleep time. So technology was really there. It was great to be able to combine in the sleep study, for instance, our device with a sleep tracker. And, a lot of our patients in the real world do that. So if you buy our device and you have a sleep tracker, I recommend you know what your baseline sleep patterns are, and then you use our device. You can track your sleep on a weekly basis, even on a daily basis, but really at least a weekly basis or biweekly. And you can see, is the device having an effect and on your total sleep time? So that's nice to be able to quantify the results. I'm sure that you've done that with other products too, where you can actually, ones that may impact sleep, you can actually have your own personal clinical trial, which is nice with a sleep tracker.
Yeah, the sleep tracking, it's so crucial, because when you start diving into it, like sleep, you start to realize the different stages of sleep. Like you could be in bed for 8 hours, but you might only sleep for a couple. Right. You might only get like 15 minutes of deep sleep, 5 minutes of REM. And, you wake up every day and you're like, oh, why do I feel so groggy? I've slept all this time. And then you start to realize, oh, I didn't actually sleep. I was like restless. I was like in this light stage sleep. And then, then you're living off of coffee. And then that in itself starts going towards depression, anxiety, and all kinds of mood issues.
You fix sleep, you can often fix the mood issues. And that is true in the veteran population. I mean, I know we have a retired general on our board who treats patients, and that's his number one priority is stabilizing sleep first, and then working on everything else. He's like, until you have a good night's sleep, it's really going to be hard to pinpoint fixing anything else. You got to fix the sleep first.
That's so cool. So let's talk about the device. How does the device work? Give me kind of an overview of, like what this thing is. And cause I've looked at it online. It looks pretty simple. But I'd love to know, kind of like the science behind it and how it actually works.
Sure. So yeah, this is our version 1. I would almost call it a POC or proof of concept design. We are building a version 2 right now that's going to come out. We're targeting April as a ship date for next year. And that's being designed by Eric Fields, who designed Beats headphone products and Nest products. It's going to look really great. So what we have now looks more like a hospital device, which is kind of the origins of it. And it works. It has 2 electrodes. One goes on either side of the head. Right now you slip it under a headband, and there's wires that come down and connect to a handheld unit that you can turn on and off. In version 2, it's going to be wireless, but in this version, and both are going to have the same output. But what's nice about having the version 1, it has some great benefits. It's very easy to use. The replaceables, if you need another headband, that's not expensive. The sponges are not expensive, and then there's the batteries, which are all AA batteries. So it's very inexpensive to maintain once you buy it. In terms of the mechanism of action, there's kind of 2 forms of research. One is the symptom reduction, where you do research to actually measure over time, does the device lower symptoms versus a placebo? And then there's mechanism of action, which is what is actually happening in the brain and the body to help explain why this is happening. So I would say, just off the bat, we know more about the symptom reduction than we know about the mechanism, but we do know some of the mechanism. So we have published 2 studies with our device on biomarker studies that are looking at serotonin production. We've seen durable increases in serotonin. lowering of cortisol, stress hormone. And there was a study done with a similar device, not ours, that shows modulation of the default mode network. This is with alternating current, which is what our device is. Not to get too technical, but there's alternating current, which means the polarity changes in the electrodes. It goes back and forth, positive, negative, versus direct current, which stays fixed. One's always positive, one's always negative. So with alternating current in academic labs, they're able to build alternating current stimulators you don't have to go buy something commercially. You can build it. So it's a little bit different than ours in terms of frequency, but it's in the ballpark. So the physiological effects, it's very likely there's some similar things going on. So what they've seen with those lab devices is modulation of the default mode network, which is the center brain regions, which are responsible for a lot of things, but including kind of sympathetic nervous system response to the fight or flee. So be able to, if you think of it like a thermostat, it looks like that alternating current within the frequency range that we do, that we deliver, can kind of downregulate that feeling of fight or flee.
Is that through the hypothalamus? Sorry to interrupt.
That is connected. So the Brodmann areas of the brain are what our electrodes are actually directly above, and the Brodmann area does it sends signals to the hypothalamus. The Brodmann area actually also sends signals to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the very front cortex. And so it's interesting. There's research that shows that deactivation of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex can correlate to reducing depression. I mean, to having depression. And so you want to increase the activity of that area. And so there are some brain stimulation techniques that put electrodes right here on the forehead. The problem is that the bone is very, very thick in the forehead. There's some more resistance. And actually the center regions of the brain, the Brodmann areas, are so interconnected with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So we've done some FNIR studies and some sensor studies that shows that dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is getting quite activated, even though we're stimulating here, because of the connectivity. So that's another potential mechanism in terms of depression reduction, is actually stimulating the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And then there is brainwave entrainment, which is, and you can achieve this part through other means, but not necessarily for the same duration. So if you do deep breathing or use meditation, you can get into an alpha state. Alternating current has been shown to actually entrain the brain into an alpha state electrically. So you don't need to do the breathing, or it's actually kind of forcing the brain to get into an alpha state through the delivery of the current within that frequency zone, which is around, for alpha, it's like around 12 hertz. So all those things combined, the neurochemicals, the sympathetic nervous response, the default mode network, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex stimulation, the brainwave entrainment, all of these things have been shown to have an impact from alternating current stimulation of the brain. What we're investing in next is doing much more kind of imagery. So not just using FNIRS, which is more looking at blood flow, but fMRI, which is much more detailed brain imagery of pre, during, and post. And so there's still a ways we have to go to fully explain mechanism. One thing that we want to explore is, for instance, membrane potential. Is the electrical stimulation actually increasing membrane potential in neuronal cells, meaning it's easier for chemicals to pass through the membrane and for the cell to receive it, kind of essentially making the cells act like they're younger, especially in older patients. Is that happening? How much is the stimulation of the optic nerve impacting things? So one of the things you see when you wear a device, if you close your eyes, you'll see little flashing lights. And we are stimulating, because the optic nerve actually goes back quite a ways. Even though the electrodes are here, the optic nerve the end of it is very close. Now that is also connected to other parts of the brain, which are likely to have impact on mood and sleep. For instance, this is why circadian rhythms are important. And, when humans are conditioned evolutionary wise to sleep at night, and they get you have different serotonin and other neurochemicals that are activated from daylight. So it makes sense that if you're stimulating optic nerve, that could have an effect on the way that your brain is processing those things. So there's more work for us to do there. But what we focused our money on this summer, or not this summer, all of last year, was on the symptom side. We wanted to show definitively that the device works on reducing symptoms, and then next is getting a more clear picture on how it's doing that. But we at least were showing that it's safe and effective, and then we can get more into the how it's doing it.
Wow. That's so detailed. There's so many things going on there that your device does. Like for example, I use this other device called the Omni PEMF, and it uses transmagnetic cranial stimulation. So basically it's like magnets that vibrate, and it does that same kind of brainwave entrainment. And it's real interesting. They have like several, you can like use different settings that are specialized, like for sleep, for relaxation, for brain, for enhanced learning, which is pretty cool. I'll be honest, I don't know if it's working, but it does have some effect going on there. So it sounds like you guys are kind of taking that to the next level.
Yeah, and our version 2 device is going to feature an app that actually tracks your symptoms. So you'll be able to, just like we did in the trials, you could, like for depression, you could do what's called the Beck Depression Inventory. For anxiety, the Beck Anxiety Inventory. It's a 21 question questionnaire. It's the same one you use in a clinical trial. That's gold standard for tracking these symptoms. So you could do a baseline, and we want to test you every 2 weeks. So just a few minutes. 21 questions. You can get through a lot of these in under 10 minutes. So you can really get your own personal results. And then we also want to do cognitive performance testing. So memory, focus, and concentration. And they're pretty simple games you can use short to be able to test that. And so we want to be able to give you kind of clinical grade data on your own performance, kind of in the way you might get with a heart rate monitor and a sleep tracker and a fitness tracker, but for your mental health and cognitive performance. And so to give you kind of that data, and then we can aggregate that data as well as we did in the trials. Instead of 800 patients, we sold 11,000 devices last year. We could get a lot more patients on an anonymized basis, and then that will give us some really interesting data on kind of correlations between usage and results, and I think finally get some pretty big numbers in terms of statistical significance around the cognitive piece, which we haven't done any significant research on yet. It's just like another thing to spend money on, and we have to kind of pick our battles. But especially for older patients who are beginning to think about wanting to protect against dementia and some other things, I think being able to track cognitive performance will be really important. And if we can show some improvements there, that'll only make using the device more appealing. Even if you're originally using it, say, to treat your anxiety, if you can see, my memory is also improving a bit here, which would make sense because the memory regions of the brain there's a lot in the center region there.
Yeah, and these things all kind of work together. It's almost a disservice that we almost think of these things separately.
Right.
And maybe it's the commercialization of everything. Like, hey, take this supplement for memory, take this supplement for depression, take this supplement for or use this device for focus, right? But like, it all kind of comes from what you were talking about, which is, like the fight or flight, right? Like cortisol, and cortisol, the way that it affects the brain and the way that your stress response, your fight or flight, your rest and digest, the way that your brain is actually communicating to your nervous system. If you're in a high state of panic all the time, well, you're going to have anxiety, and then you're also going to have memory deficits, and then you're also going to have depression, and then you're also going to have a hard time focusing. It all kind of goes together.
That's very true. And I think you're right. I think it does come out of this need to give a marketing message, and it's actually more complicated than that. And so, well, it's nice be able come onto a podcast and talk about it, because it is more complicated than that. And especially with the brain, it's a very complicated organ. I mean, it's an electrical organ though. And I think that's, it's important to acknowledge on a basic level as to why these technologies that are actually delivering electrical stimulation, whether it's magnetically derived or in our case, it's not, we don't use magnets. We're actually directing current through sponge electrodes, but yeah, it's an electrical organ, and so it's nice to not have to go through the gastro tract,
And this is a kind of therapy that goes back a long time, right? Like they've been using this
in
electric
cruder forms. Yeah, it has gone back. I mean, 1950s there were devices. I mean, I have an antique device. I want to say from, I got to check it out from. I don't think it's still. I'd bring it and show you here, but it's like a wooden box that had I think it was turn of the century, like around 1900, where these are brass, electrodes, and there was a crank, and there's, someone that would come like house to house and offer this kind of electrotherapy. So, I mean, all the way back into ancient Roman times, they would actually use electric eels and put them on the head.
Wow. And
that's actually an effective way to treat headaches, is to stimulate the trigeminal nerve. There is a device called Cephaly. We have no involvement in it. That has research. It's an electrode that has a sticker basically on it. You stick it to your forehead, and it is helpful in treating migraines. There is data quite a bit that shows the relationship between trigeminal nerve stimulation and headache reduction. So it's just interesting that they didn't know that necessarily, but they were putting the electric fish on their heads.
Yeah.
And it was working. They had a headache. They put the fish there. The pain went away. So yes, it goes back a while. I would say what's happening now is there's both, more ways to collect data. And there's a move, and I think in 5 years from now, Fisher-Wallace will probably have, more than one product, and may have something what's called closed loop, where we're able to actually customize stimulation based on what your brain's doing in real time. That is already a thing, but there's actually not any data that shows it's more effective yet in treating symptoms. But I think intuitively it makes sense that if you have enough patients using a system like that you can kind of have machine learning get involved and figure out some things about the way that people respond to electrical stimulation in certain areas of the brain, and be able to kind of fine tune the treatment process. So that's going to take having really, really good sensors that are inexpensive to make it commercially viable. And so it's a little bit of time away from now, but that's kind of, I think, the next phase. And then, there's this whole area of surgically implanted brain stimulation, which, the Elon Musk Neuralink, and there's some other deep brain stimulation technologies and others that are out there, but we're always going to want to, Fisher-Wallace is always going to want to focus on the non-surgical. So.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if you have any data, like in terms of neuroinflammation, inflammatory markers, or like beta amyloids, or, things that influence like brain aging.
That's a great question. So that is I'm working on building a protocol right now. So the answer is no, not with our device, but we will soon. We're going to do a study with probably about 500 patients with blood work, so that we can really see all kinds of different markers. And I think the membrane potential thing is one that I'm very interested in, because that may have some impacts in terms of potential with Alzheimer's and other things. So, there has been some research done with alternating current pacemakers, for instance, and they've seen increases in membrane potential of blood cells that have been exposed to that alternating current pacemaker. So the thinking is that, well, this is almost like a kind of pacemaker in a sense for the head, for the brain. There is actually something called deep brain stimulation, which is a surgically implanted stimulator, and that's, has had some traction with Parkinson's and other things. But we're an external stimulator. We're more of a whole brain, even though our electrodes are over the center brain regions where the skull is also the thinnest. Some of the interesting biomarker stuff that we're seeing in the alternating current pacemaker studies may very well apply to the brain in some ways. So, we do have those older biomarker studies, like I mentioned, on serotonin and cortisol that showed durable increases in serotonin, I believe up to 6 hours after using the device. But there's more that we have to do there.
And I could see why the serotonin would cover the bases on depression, anxiety, and sleep, because of course, more serotonin, less depression, more serotonin, less anxiety, but also more serotonin, more melatonin, better sleep.
Yeah, and there's some debate around that with depression. That used to be the main theory, but I think depression, if it was only about serotonin, we would have more effective treatments. I think there's still a lot of complexity in the way that the brain manifests depression. But it certainly, I think what I took away from seeing the biomarker data for our device is that it's essentially, it's good to see that it's having an actual physiological effect and it is. I just don't know if I would tie all of its efficacy to that, to the serotonin. I think there's probably more in what we're talking about with the brainwave entrainment, the sympathetic nervous system management, those kinds of things that are probably more centrally responsible for mood improvement than just the serotonin itself.
And could you explain this membrane potential piece? Because I kind of get it, but for maybe like myself and some people at home, why is that such a crucial part that you think about?
In the alternating current pacemaker studies, they showed increase in membrane potential. I believe you can do that with a dye, a fluorescent dye that you can inject, and then you can actually measure. By membrane potential, I would think of it as kind of the ability of the cell membrane, whether that's in a blood cell or in the brain, a neuron, for it to pass and receive information, which is which could include proteins and neurotransmitters, and so I think the way to think about it is like the younger the cell, the healthier the cell, the higher the potential, the higher the better of the ability for it to send and receive information. The older the cell, the less ability for that cell to send and receive information, which would include proteins and other things. So the heart researcher who developed one of these pacemakers actually had reached out to me and said, because he was aware of our product, and he's like, I want you to be aware of the research that I've done here with this membrane potential in our pacemakers, and that you may find, he's saying to me, that could be a primary mechanism of action. If you're actually causing the brain cells, which are inhibited either because of age or some other kind of disease, to have a reduced membrane potential, and you're increasing it, that may be why you're seeing effects, everything from mood to cognition to sleep. So, that kind of opened my eyes up, because that was kind of a deeper level of biochemistry that was kind of above my pay grade. And so as a result of that conversation, I'm hiring someone now to work on a protocol, and we're going to be looking at that and a whole host of other things, including serotonin and cortisol, but also, there's going to be a whole series of markers that we're looking for, and that could help tell the story of why the device works.
That's cool. Because if you can affect things at the cellular level, especially the membrane, which controls essentially even just the integrity of the cell. I mean, that's huge. And it sounds like you're getting into like a longevity benefit. And I wonder like what
Absolutely.
happens then.
And there's some predicate data, right, with this alternating current pacemaker, which is encouraging. It's not like it's just kind of a thought out of left field. I mean, this heart surgeon who's a researcher just like, was banging down my door to tell me that this is because he actually used the device and likes the device and was like, boy, I think this is why your device may be working. But, it requires a 500 subject, blood testing study, which is not inexpensive to do. And so we have to, there's some money and time and it's actually in some senses more complicated than the studies we just did, because you have to have all these subjects actually give blood, which means you have to have a level of actual physical doctor administration that we didn't need to do for the mental health studies, because they were just filling out these questionnaires and they could interact with the doctor over a Zoom, basically. So, but we're going to do it. I mean, we're raising money on Start Engine. It's our equity crowdfunding campaign. We've raised almost $3 million so far. That's what funded these studies this past year. And we're raising more now. A lot of it comes from our customers, by the way, which is kind of nice validation. But I think by the fall, like I'm hoping by October, we'll have not just the protocol ready, but the money to fund this larger blood testing study and really look at biomarkers there. Yeah.
And I mean, that's going to be amazing information to have for sure. Yep. Cause you can put it in a journal, you can yep. show it to people, of course. But at the end of the day, when this heart surgeon researcher comes to you, who's sounds like he's very qualified and says, this thing works. I mean, those 3 words alone, when people use it, if it works for you, if it doesn't, like I have
2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I have these gadgets. I use them. Like, I got this thing. It's it's like a hand grip strengthening device. Yeah. It's called the Zona, and I use it. And blood pressure, right? I don't have blood pressure issues, but like I used it and I immediately knew it worked, right? Because it was like my sleep was better. It relaxes you. It's just isometric exercise, not hard to do. And I don't know I still don't really get the science behind it, but at the end of the day is like, does it work or does it not work?
Yeah. Totally. And we have a 30-day return policy with our device. We get 15% of them back, which we're very happy with. That, that's a pretty low return rate. Free shipping both ways, 100% refunds. So you're $0 out if it doesn't work. And we tell our patients to give it 2 weeks. You have 30 days. It's not going to take you if you use it twice a day, it's not going to take you 30 days to figure it out. It'll take you, most patients will respond in a week, and then the rest of them within 2 weeks. If you don't feel you're having a result in that time, then you're likely not going to. So, yeah, I fully hear you. But I think there is also, because we're asking for an investment of money and time, we want to have the science to say, here's a population of people and this is the percentages that they did work and that didn't work, and here is evidence to show that it's not just a placebo effect, and I think clinically placebo effect is just as valid as an active effect, right? I mean, clinically, you just want the person to get better. Who cares if it's placebo effect or not? But with when you're making a claim, a medical claim, you have to be able to say that this is actually functioning better, the real thing, than a placebo, and that's on a fundamental difference. That is the difference between the FDA regulated medical field and everything else, is that you ultimately, need to show that it's better than a placebo. It kind of comes down to that.
Yeah. And that's such a strong statement too, that you guys have the FDA approval. You can only get this through a doctor's prescription. So it's not just like you're running commercials and then somebody says, oh, I want that, and then they order it online or from Amazon or something. It's like, no, you have to get a second opinion from what we assume is a qualified, person.
Yeah, it's not an exhaustive analysis, but there is a real doctor person with a licensed in your state that needs to read your questions and may have a follow-up question based on your answers. But you know, what I will say just to is that if the contraindications for our device, or if you have a pacemaker, or if you have an implanted electronic device, because those things can potentially be interfered with by an outside electrical stimulation device. But outside of that, if you don't have something electrical that's working inside your body, like a pacemaker or deep brain stimulator, the risks are potential headache and dizziness, which is around 1% of the patient. So it's very low risk. And so, that's also why the screening process, there's a prescription process, but it doesn't need to be as invasive of a screening process as you would for, say, a drug, where there could be some very serious interactions with something. So
for sure. Yeah. Well, this has been great, Kelly. I'm so interested to learn more about this device and have people hear this, especially people who could benefit from it. So let's say a listener or viewer wanted to get themselves one, try it out. Where would they go online if they have any questions, if they want to learn more, if they want to chat with you? What would be the best place to send somebody to go learn more?
It'd be Fisher-Wallace.com, Fisher Wallace.com. And there's a prescription process. By the time your listeners hear this podcast, the prescription process will be fully integrated into our checkout, just like it is for Hims and Hers and some other platforms, telemedicine platforms. So it'll be and it's bundled into the price. So there's no extra price for the prescription. It's built into the price of the device. It's sent to a third-party telemedicine company, and then they render the prescription, and you can go through it. It's $500, again, 30-day return policy, full refund policy. There's payment plans like there are in any e-commerce, so you can pay monthly, and it's fully refundable. So we have live chat 7 days a week, from morning till midnight during the week, and until 10 or 11 p.m. on Eastern time on the weekend. So we pride ourselves in making ourselves very available. And if you want to send something directly to me, email it to info at Fisher-Wallace.com to say this is for Kelly Roman. I will get forwarded, and I will respond, within a couple of days. Give me a couple of days, but I will respond to it. There's nothing I don't respond to that comes to me.
Awesome. And I'll put all that when we release this in our show notes. And then so anybody who wants that, they will be able to get in touch with you and hopefully grab one of these things for themselves.
Awesome. Thank you.
Kelly, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Holistic Nootropics podcast. Viewer, listener, you know what to do from here. Head on over to holisticnootropics.com. Look for the show notes there in the podcast section. And to learn more, find Kelly online. And if for all things Holistic Nootropics, check out holisticnootropics.com. Until next time, we'll catch you. Have a great day. Peace.
Thanks for listening. For more brain-boosting info, in-depth articles, and show notes, check out holisticnootropics.com.